Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Part 1. The Sun at Midnight. The air over the Pacific was smooth as oiled glass. The Enola Gay, a silver B-29 superfortress named for the pilot's mother, droned through the pre-dawn darkness of August 6, 1945. In the cockpit, Colonel Paul Tibbets felt a familiar, focused calm. He was flying the most important mission in history, a mission born in the secret cities of Los Alamos and Oak Ridge, fueled by the collective, desperate energy of a war that had consumed the world. Behind him, in the bomb bay, rested not just another payload of high explosives, but an entirely new category of existence. Little Boy. A uranium gun-type device, a 9,700-pound enigma of physics and destruction. The crew was taut with a nervous energy they couldn't fully name. They had trained for this, endlessly. They knew the weapon was powerful, but the briefings had been cloaked in abstract language, equivalent to thousands of tons of TNT. A new order of magnitude. For Tail Gunner Staff Sergeant George Bob Caron, the assigned photographer, it was a job. A strange one, yes. The scientists had been twitchy, their warnings apocalyptic yet vague. But Bob was a professional. He focused on his turret, scanning the empty, star-flecked sky behind them. As the first rays of dawn painted the horizon, the Japanese mainland emerged from the sea. Their primary target, the city of Hiroshima, a military headquarters and logistical hub, lay ahead under a scattered cloud cover. The mood shifted from anticipation to sterile procedure. Tibbets handed control to the bombardier, Major Thomas Farabee. "It's all yours," he said, the words hanging in the intercom. At 8:15:17 local time, the bomb bay doors yawned open. The sleek black cylinder fell away. The Enola Gay, suddenly 9,700 pounds lighter, lurched upward. Tibbets threw the plane into the steep, 155-degree diving turn they had practiced 100 times, putting as much distance as possible between them and the point of detonation. The crew counted. 43 seconds of silent, breathless freefall. Then, the world ended. First, there was the light. A light that had no business existing on Earth. It filled the cockpit, blindingly intense, a searing white purple that etched the bones of their hands through closed eyelids. Bob Caron, in his tail turret, saw it reflected in his plexiglass dome, a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, annihilating shadows, turning the plane's interior into a photographic negative. "My God," he whispered into his mic, the words swallowed by what came next. The shockwave hit them like a physical wall. The colossal B-29, built to withstand flak, shuddered violently, its frame groaning in protest. It felt like being inside a giant tin can struck by a god's hammer. Then came the sound, a deep, visceral thud crack that seemed to originate in their own chests, a sound of ultimate rupture. Caron swiveled his turret to look back. What he saw stole his breath. A colossal, roiling pillar of purple-gray smoke and fire was climbing into the sky with terrifying speed, already miles high. At its base, where the city of Hiroshima had been, an expanding dome of hellish orange and red churned, swallowing everything. It was alive, malevolent, and impossibly vast. As they watched, the pillar formed its now iconic malignant mushroom cap, a tumor on the sky. Below, a secondary layer of smoke. The dust of a vaporized city began to spread, blotting out the sun. The pristine morning had been replaced by a vision of biblical judgment. Weaponeer Captain William Deke Parsons, who had armed the bomb in flight, sent the coded message to Tinian Island. Results clear-cut, successful in all respects, visual effects greater than Trinity. The words were dry, technical. They conveyed nothing of the awe and dread that had gripped the crew. Navigator Theodore Dutch Van Kirk later said it was like watching a city die in the time it takes to boil an egg. On the ground, time had fractured. For Dr. Michihiko Hachiya, director of the Hiroshima Communications Hospital, The morning had been ordinary. He was at home, in his underwear, watching the morning sun through the leaves of a persimmon tree. Then, the flash. A silent, magnesium-brilliant blast of heat that seared the pattern of the window frame onto his skin and the leaves' shadows onto the concrete wall behind him. The sound and the blast wave came an instant later, shattering his house into a whirlwind of splinters and tiles. He was buried, bleeding, the world reduced to dust-choked chaos and a single, all-consuming sound. The cries of the injured, a chorus of agony rising from the ruins of his city. He stumbled into a new landscape. The familiar streets were gone, replaced by a smoldering plain of rubble. Fires were springing up everywhere, fueled by broken gas lines and shattered shoji screens. And then there were the people. Silhouettes against the flames, their clothes burned away, their skin hanging from their bodies in great dripping sheets like grotesque rags. They moved like ghosts, arms held out before them to keep their hanging flesh from touching anything, silent or moaning a single word. Mizu. Mizu. Water. Water. The river was clogged with corpses, the living stumbling through them, their faces blistered beyond recognition. The sun was gone, blotted out by the towering pillar of smoke and the rising dust of what had once been a city of 350,000 souls. It was, as one survivor put it, the sun at midnight. In the Enola Gay, now hundreds of miles away and turning for home, the initial shock gave way to a profound, hollow silence. They had done their duty. They had, they believed, delivered a blow that would end the war, saving countless American and Japanese lives that would be lost in an invasion. But as they flew away from that monstrous, growing cloud, no one celebrated. The scale of what they had unleashed was too absolute, too inhuman. Bob Karen kept snapping photos, his hands steady but his mind reeling. They had not just bombed a city. They had split the timeline of history. The age of conventional war, for all its horrors, was now a relic. A new era had dawned in that single flash, the atomic age. And they were its first stunned messengers, carrying back not just news of a mission accomplished, but the image of a fire that could consume the world. Part 2. The Heavier Shadow. For 3 days, the world held its breath. The United States announced the use of a new atomic bomb on Hiroshima. In Japan, the military-dominated Supreme Council for the direction of the war was plunged into crisis and disbelief. The reports from Hiroshima were fragmentary, apocalyptic, impossible to fully grasp. A single bomb? An entire city? Communications were severed. The Army insisted it was a special, powerful, conventional weapon, downplaying the catastrophe, refusing to yield. The peace faction, led by a desperate Emperor Hirohito, saw the abyss opening. Yet, the deadlock held. No surrender. On Tinian Island, the mood was grimly determined. The shock of Hiroshima was now subsumed by military necessity. The message had to be reinforced. The second act of the atomic drama was already in motion. This time, the weapon was different. Fat Man, a plutonium implosion device, even more complex and potentially more powerful than Little Boy. The primary target was Kokura Arsenal. The cast was different too. Major Charles Sweeney commanded Boxcar, another B-29, with the weaponeer Captain Frederick Ashworth overseeing the bomb. August 9th dawned with problems. Boxcar had a faulty fuel pump, meaning thousands of gallons of gasoline were trapped and unusable. They rendezvoused with their observation planes over Yakushima, but one, Big Stink, failed to appear on time. Sweeney, low on fuel and under strict radio silence, made a fateful decision. He would not wait. They proceeded to Kokura. Fate, or poor visibility, intervened. Kokura was obscured by smoke and industrial haze drift from a massive firebombing raid on nearby Yahata the previous night. They made 3 bombing runs, each time unable to achieve the visual sighting required. Flak began to pepper the sky around them. Japanese fighters were scrambled. With fuel gauges dipping alarmingly, Sweeney had one last chance. The secondary target, Nagasaki, a city of hills and valleys, a major port and home to the Mitsubishi shipyards. Nagasaki was also under cloud cover. As they approached, Bombardier Captain Kermit Bayhan had a brief, miraculous window of break in the clouds revealing the city's industrial valley. At 11:01 a.m., Fat Man fell. The fuel was so low they would have to divert to Okinawa, unable to make it back to Tinian. The detonation over the Urakami Valley, the Catholic district of Nagasaki, was marginally higher and more efficient than Hiroshima's. The blast was confined by the hills, magnifying its destructive force in the valley while partially shielding other parts of the city. The light, the heat, the mushroom cloud, a monstrous recurring dream manifested once more. On the ground, the horror was both a repeat and a variation. 16-year-old Sumiteru Taniguchi was delivering mail on his bicycle. The flash burned the clothes from his back and fused the skin on his arms and back into a melted, grotesque landscape. He would spend the next decade and a half mostly on his stomach, undergoing countless skin grafts, a living testament to the bomb's enduring cruelty. In the ruins of the Urakami Cathedral, worshippers were incinerated at prayer. The black rain, a radioactive downpour of dust and ash, fell on the survivors, adding an invisible, lingering poison to their visible wounds. In Tokyo, the delayed, confused reports from Nagasaki broke the stalemate. The military hardliners, who had argued after Hiroshima that America could only have one such weapon, were shattered. The unthinkable had happened twice. That very night, Emperor Hirohito, in an unprecedented intervention, recorded the Jewel voice broadcast, accepting the Potsdam Declaration. The war would end, he stated, to pave the way for a grand peace for all the generations to come, by enduring the unendurable and suffering what is insufferable. For the crew of Boxcar, landing on Okinawa on fumes, the relief was physical, not celebratory. They had faced mechanical failure, weather, enemy fire, and the immense pressure of their atomic burden. Their mission was technically more fraught, less clean than the Enola Gaze, and in the shadow of the first bomb's shock, their role felt darker, more like an executioner's second, confirming blow. In Washington, President Truman, receiving word of the Nagasaki bombing and the impending surrender, addressed the nation. He spoke of a harnessing of the basic power of the universe, of the sun's power brought down to Earth to destroy those who brought war to the Far East. He framed it as a terrible necessity, a choice between 250,000 of the flower of our young manhood and 500,000 Japanese lives in an invasion, versus the atomic alternative. The calculus of lives, a grim mathematics of the greater good, was presented as the war's final tragic equation. But in the basements of the Pentagon and the halls of the Kremlin, a different calculation had already begun. The monopoly would not last. The secret was out. The question was no longer how to win this war, but how to survive the next one. The shadow of the mushroom cloud had grown heavier, longer, and now it fell across the entire globe, dividing the future into a before and an unsteady, terrified after. Part 3. The Unending Dawn. The surrender was signed aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay on September 2, 1945. The guns fell silent. But in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the war was not over. It had mutated. Dr. Hachiya, recovering from his wounds, began to document the strange, new afflictions plaguing the survivors, the hibakusha. People who had walked away seemingly unscathed began to sicken and die. Their hair fell out in clumps. Purple petechia spots bloomed on their skin. They were racked with fever, diarrhea, and a profound, wasting weakness. The mysterious A-bomb disease radiation sickness was claiming lives weeks and months after the blasts. The atomic bomb was not a weapon of a single moment. It was a poison that lingered in the bones, in the genes, in the very soil. For the hibakusha, survival carried a bitter stigma. They faced discrimination in marriage and employment, feared as if they were contagious, living reminders of a national trauma many wished to forget. Their suffering was compounded by the American occupation's censorship. Photographs, film reels, and medical reports detailing the full human effects were classified, deemed too shocking for public view, to avoid hindering the occupation or stirring anti-American sentiment. The victims were silenced twice over. In America, the initial relief at the war's end curdled into a complex stew of pride, guilt, and dread. The crews of the Enola Gay and Boxcar were hailed as heroes who ended the war, yet many of them wrestled privately with what they had seen. Bob Caron's photographs, though censored, leaked into the public consciousness. The vision of the mushroom cloud became the dominant symbol of the new age, a symbol of ultimate power and ultimate vulnerability. The scientific minds who had built the bomb were the first to sound the alarm. J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, recalled the line from the Bhagavad Gita upon witnessing the Trinity test. "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." By 1946, he was arguing passionately for international control of atomic energy, warning of a future arms race that would endanger humanity. His rival, Edward Teller, was already dreaming of the hydrogen bomb, a weapon 1,000 times more powerful. The arms race began before the rubble in Nagasaki was cleared. In 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic device, Joe 1. The monopoly was broken. The shadow now had two sources. The logic of deterrence took hold, a balance of terror known as mutually assured destruction. MAD. The world partitioned itself into nuclear-armed camps, living under a fragile peace maintained by the promise of annihilation. Families built fallout shelters. School children practiced duck and cover drills, a pathetic pantomime against the thermal pulse of a thermonuclear blast. Every international crisis, Berlin, Cuba, Korea, was viewed through the lens of the nuclear threshold. The sword of Damocles now hung over all of humanity. Its hair a single miscommunication, a single malfunction, a single moment of madness. Decades later, the debate over the bomb's use remains the rawest nerve of World War II history. The orthodox view upholds Truman's calculus. It ended the war swiftly, saving more lives than it took. The revisionist view argues Japan was already defeated, on the verge of surrender, and the bombs were dropped primarily to intimidate the Soviet Union, marking the opening salvo of the Cold War rather than the closing act of the hot one. The truth likely resides in a painful gray amalgam of both. A desire to end the war, a fear of the invasion's cost, a need to justify the $2 billion Manhattan Project, and a stark demonstration of power for a post-war world already taking shape. The legacy of August 1945 is not a single event, but a permanent condition. It is the paradox of a weapon so terrible it has, so far, prevented its own use in global conflict. It is the ongoing anguish of the hibakusha, whose plea is simply, never again. It is the ever-present risk of proliferation, of accidents, of nuclear terrorism. It is the knowledge that human ingenuity, which can cure diseases and reach for the stars, also forge the means for our own total extinction. The sun that rose over Hiroshima that August morning was not just sunlight. It was a man-made star, a brief, artificial sun that revealed, in its blinding flash, not just the power of the atom, but the darkest and most fragile aspects of the human heart. Our capacity for wrath, our calculus of violence, and our desperate ongoing struggle to control the world, altering forces we unleash. The nuclear age did not begin with a bang that faded. It began with a light that never fully goes out, casting a long, cold, and perpetual dawn over all human endeavor.